Hey Tech Math, here are the guided notes for 8.5. So saving money and making wise investments is a really important part of your financial well-being. And that sounds like a bunch of, they're big words, in my opinion, but they also sound like hooey. They don't make much sense. But essentially all that means is that if you want to have money and you don't want to be poor, you need to make really good decisions with your money. So you need to invest money and put money back into savings accounts. So part of investing is earning something called interest. And most of you are familiar with interest, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about how it's calculated and why it's so important. When you save money by putting it in a bank account, the bank uses that money for its own investment. It's kind of like the opposite of a credit card. The bank is borrowing your money to use. So in return for using your money, the bank pays you a certain percentage, and that's called interest. So interest is the percent that the bank pays you for keeping your money in their bank and for them using it. And the formula for finding simple interest, I have to double click on this, is going to be I equals PRT, where those are multiplied by each other. And we need to know what each of those is. So I is going to be the interest that you make on the account. P is going to be the principal amount that you invest. That's the original, that's how much you put into it. The next thing we're going to have is the R. That is the, I guess it's going to capitalize it. Normally we don't. But R is going to be the rate that the bank gives you in order to pay you that percentage. And then finally, T is going to be the time invested. That's how long you leave it in the bank. However, we always talk about time in terms of years. So if it ever says that you only left it in for a certain number of months, we'll have to calculate how much of a year that is. 6 months would be half a year. So we would put 1/2 in for T. All right, let's keep going with that. So let's look at an example of what this looks like. Mrs. Payne has $20,000 to invest. Right away, I'm going to try to determine which piece of my formula that is. $20,000 is the original amount. That's the principal she makes. So the P in this case is $20,000. It says she wants to earn $10,000 in interest. That one's pretty easy. It tells me right off the bat that it's interest. It says she is considering a savings and loan bank that is offering a 5.6% interest rate per year. Immediately, it doesn't say rate, but I know it's a percentage, so it's going to be a rate. But even though it's 5.6%, we can't calculate with that. So remember back to our decimals and percents unit, we have to turn that into a decimal. We move it 2 places to the left. So 5.6% becomes 0.056. It then asks for how long will she have to leave her money in the bank in order to reach her goal. Well, T is the only piece left in my formula that I don't have, and it's also what it's asking for. So I leave T as a question mark. Once I'm there, I can just plug in different pieces into my original formula where I equals PRT. So that's what I'm going to do. I equals P times R times T. So, actually I'm going to go over a little bit here. I know my interest is $10,000. It equals my principal amount of $20,000 times my rate of 0.056 times my time, which in this case I don't know. Now, in order to solve for this, to get T alone, I have to get all of these things being multiplied to the other side. And the way that I'm going to do this is by dividing. I'm going to divide this entire side by these two in order to get T by itself. So T is equal to $10,000 divided by that whole right side. So 20,000 times 0.056. If you're going to put this in a calculator, I really suggest being careful because these parentheses might trip you up. So I'm going to throw this in my calculator. Make sure I don't get too gung-ho here. When I plug that in, I get a really large decimal, but in this case, I'm just going to round it off to about 1 decimal. So I get T equal to 8.9 years. So if she wants to make $10,000 in interest at this rate, she's going to have to leave it in the bank for about 9 years. This isn't real common. Most banks do not give you that much interest. They actually charge you less than 1% in my experience. So this is not common. All right, let's keep going here. So determining investment choices, not only can you use this formula to determine how much interest you can make, because that's what our formula primarily does, you can also use it to find out how much time it will take to earn a certain amount of interest. Just like we did in this example. We can also use it to find out what rate you will need in order to make a certain amount of interest. So if you're comparing banks and you say, I want to make $10,000 interest in 10 years, this bank will do 5.6% versus another bank will only do 4.3%. You obviously want to take the higher one, but if you're really keen on making a certain percentage, you know that there is a minimum rate percentage that you could take. So that's what number 2 does. And finally, it tells us how much is needed to invest in order to reach a certain amount of interest. So let's look at 3 examples. They're on the page here. Let's look at 3 examples and see what type each one is, and then we will determine how to solve each of them. All right, let's look at example 1. A bank is offering an interest rate of 4.75%. Just like I did with the other one, I just immediately want to start writing things down that I know. So 4.75% as a decimal would be 0.0475. Move that decimal place 2 to the left. Then it says, how long would it take? So I know that I'm going to be trying to find time. I'm going to immediately put time as my question mark. To earn $500. Well, if I'm earning something, that means I didn't originally invest it. That means that is my interest amount, leaving only this $12,000 if I invest it. So my principal amount is going to be $12,000. From here, we just plug things in. We know I equals PRT. I is 500, and it equals 12,000 times, so that's P times R, which is 0.0, let's space these out a little bit, 0.0475. Yes, you do need all the decimals. Do not round this. We do not round until the very end, because that 0.475, that's 0.75 of a percent. That's 0.75%, and you want as much as you can get, so do not round. And we multiply it by t. This one is very similar to the example we did up here. So we're going to do the exact same thing. In order to solve for t, we need to divide the left side by everything on the right. So I'm going to say 500 divided by everything on the right to get t by itself. When I do that, I'll just put this over here so we stay on our consistent lines. T ends up being 0.88 years. I am rounding this to 2 decimals in this case. I could round it to 1, but if I rounded it to 1, I should probably just round it up to like 1 whole number. Ultimately, we do not need it in there for an entire year if we want to make $500. 0.88 of a year, if I put it in and say 0.88 times 12, it's approximately 10.5 months. So I could approximate if I wanted to. Since we were solving for time, this is going to be type 1. how to find how much time. I guess I didn't word that very well earlier, but this is type 1 because we are looking for how much time it takes. All right, next example. A nurse put $22,000 in the bank 15 years ago. That is her principal amount. It says then 15 years, since I don't see any other amount of time in here, that must be the time that I'm talking about. So T must equal 15 years. I do read through the problem just to check, but I find nothing. So she has earned $21,450 in interest. That is super uncommon, so do not expect that to be the case when you start investing, but it's really cool that she did. So that much in interest. What was the interest rate? This one is going to be a little tricky, so stay with me. We're still going to plug everything in just like we're used to. My interest is 21,450. It equals the 22 times rate times the 15. And the same way that I solved for T up here, I'm going to solve for R by dividing the left side by everything on the right side. So in this case, R is going to equal 21450 divided by 22,000 times 15. Those are the things that I need to get away by dividing because that's the inverse of multiplication. And when I do that, I get R equal to 0.065. But that doesn't mean that she only got 0.065%. Remember, we need to turn this back into a percentage. And to do that, we need to move the decimal 2 places to the right. So instead of getting 0.065, which is more realistic, she actually got a 6.5% rate. All right, on to that last example. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's just quick say, because we were looking for a rate here, that is a type 2. Because we were looking for rate. All right, last example. Jessica invests $3,000 in a credit union. That is her principal amount at an interest rate of 3.9%. She leaves the money for 5 years. What is her balance? AKA, what is her interest plus principal? Notice, balance is not asking print for interest. Balance does not equal interest. It equals how much is in the bank. So when we calculate this out, I'm not going to go through all the steps because you can see the steps that I did up here. In this case, we're just going to do P times R times T. When I do that, I get $585. But this is not my answer. It wants the balance. So if I want the balance of the account, I need to say her principal amount. Actually, I'll do it this way. Principal amount plus interest equals balance. It's going to yell at me about this being the wrong type of principal. I guess we'll spell it this way. Principal amount plus interest equals balance. So if I want to do that, it's $3,000 plus that $585 she made to equal $3,585. This is the final answer. If you just tell me that she only has $585, it's not going to be correct. We have to take into account that original $3,000 she invested. All right, there are your guided notes for 8.5. Go check out that homework.